The old man sat quietly on a worn wooden bench in the corner of the park. Around him, life moved on as if he didn't exist. Children laughed near the playground. Joggers ran past with their headphones in. Dogs chased tennis balls across the grass, but no one noticed the man sitting alone. Every day at the same time, he came to that same bench. He stared at the same small pond in front of him. Sometimes he fed the ducks. Sometimes he simply sat with his hands folded in his lap, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world rested on them. People passed by, but no one stopped until one small child did something that would change everything. Before we continue this story, take a moment to subscribe to Kindness Story Hub, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us spread stories that remind the world how powerful kindness can be. And now, let's continue. The man's name was Harold Thompson. He was 74 years old, though most people who glanced at him would have guessed older. Life had a way of aging a person faster when loneliness sat heavy on their heart. Harold used to have a very different life. For nearly 40 years, he had worked as a mechanic in a small auto shop on the edge of town in Ohio. People knew him as the man who could fix anything. Engines, lawn mowers, old trucks that everyone else had given up on, Harold could bring them back to life. He loved the work. But more than that, he loved the people. Customers would stop by just to talk. Kids from the neighborhood would watch him work and ask questions. Harold always had patience for them. He'd show them how tools worked, let them hold a wrench, sometimes even help them tighten a bolt. Back then, his shop was full of laughter, but that was many years ago. Harold's wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years earlier. His son had moved across the country for work. Phone calls became rare. Visits became even rarer after Margaret died. The house felt too quiet. The shop eventually closed when Harold retired. Without the routine, the days felt empty. So he started going to the park every afternoon at 3 o'clock. Harold walked the 3 blocks from his small house to Maplewood Park and sat on the same bench by the pond. It gave him something to do. Somewhere to be still. Most days felt invisible until one Thursday afternoon in early spring. The sky was clear, the kind of bright blue that made the sunlight sparkle on the water. Harold sat on his bench as usual, watching a pair of ducks glide across the pond. Nearby, a young boy kicked a soccer ball across the grass. The boy looked about 7 years old, with messy brown hair and bright sneakers that flashed neon green every time he ran. At one point, he kicked the ball a little too hard. The ball rolled across the grass, across the sidewalk, and gently bumped into Harold's shoe. The boy ran over quickly. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, slightly out of breath. "I didn't mean to kick it that far." Harold looked down at the ball, then at the boy for a moment. He hesitated, then he smiled softly. "That's okay," Harold said, nudging the ball back toward him with his foot. "Looks like you've got a pretty strong kick there." The boy grinned. "My coach says I do." Harold nodded. "Well, keep practicing." The boy picked up the ball, but instead of running away, he stood there. Then he looked at the empty space on the bench next to Harold. "Can I sit here for a minute?" Harold blinked in surprise. "Of course," he said. The boy sat down and placed the soccer ball at his feet. "My name's Ethan," he said cheerfully. "Harold," the old man replied. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. They both watched the ducks. Then Ethan asked a question that Harold hadn't heard in a long time. "Do you come here every day?" Harold chuckled quietly. "Pretty much." "Why?" The question was simple, but it caught Harold off guard. He thought about giving a short answer. Something easy, but instead, he told the truth. "Because it's peaceful," he said. "And sometimes it's nice to be around people, even if they don't notice you." Ethan looked up at him. "I noticed you." The words were so simple, but they hit Harold right in the heart. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then Ethan stood up suddenly. "Wait here," the boy said, grabbing his soccer ball. Before Harold could respond, Ethan ran across the grass toward a nearby picnic table where a woman, likely his mother, was sitting. They talked for a moment. Ethan pointed toward Harold. Harold worried for a second that maybe he'd done something wrong, but a minute later, Ethan ran back. This time, he was carrying something. A small paper bag. He stopped in front of Harold and held it out. "My mom packed me 2 cookies," Ethan said. "You can have one." Harold stared at the bag. "No, no," he said gently. "You should keep them." But Ethan shook his head firmly. "My teacher says sharing makes things better." Slowly, Harold took the cookie. "Thank you," he said. Ethan smiled proudly. They sat together for the next 10 minutes, talking about soccer, ducks, and the strange shapes clouds sometimes made in the sky. Eventually, Ethan's mom called him. "Time to go." Ethan jumped up. "Bye, Harold. See you tomorrow." And just like that, he ran off. Harold watched him leave for the first time in a long while. The bench didn't feel quite so lonely. The next day, Harold returned to the park at 3 o'clock. He wasn't sure if Ethan would be there, but he hoped, and sure enough, 10 minutes later, a neon green pair of sneakers came racing across the grass. "Harold." The boy sat beside him again. That afternoon turned into another conversation. And another. Days became weeks. Sometimes Ethan brought small things to share: a cookie, a juice box, or even drawings he made at school. One day he gave Harold a picture. It showed 2 stick figures sitting on a bench next to a pond. Above them, in large crayon letters, were the words, "My friend Harold." Harold took the drawing home and taped it to his refrigerator. For the first time since Margaret passed away, his house felt a little warmer, but the kindness didn't stop there. One afternoon, Ethan arrived with 3 other kids from his neighborhood. "This is Harold," he told them proudly. Soon the bench became a small gathering place. Kids stopped by after school. They asked Harold questions about tools, bikes, and how engines worked. Harold's eyes lit up again, just like the old days at the shop. One Saturday, Ethan's mother walked over while the kids were talking. "Mr. Thompson," she said kindly, "Ethan talks about you all the time." Harold smiled shyly. "Well, he's a good kid." She nodded. "He says you used to fix cars?" "For a long time," Harold replied. She hesitated for a moment. "My brother runs a small repair shop down the road. They sometimes help teenagers learn basic mechanics after school. I think they'd love someone with your experience." Harold hadn't expected that. 74. He thought those days were long behind him, but the following week, he visited the shop and something incredible happened: the smell of motor oil, the sound of tools, the curiosity of young people eager to learn. It all came rushing back. Soon Harold was volunteering there twice a week, teaching teenagers how engines worked, just like he used to. Word spread in the neighborhood. The quiet old man from the park wasn't invisible anymore. He was the guy who could fix anything. Months later, Harold still sat on the same bench in Maplewood Park, but now, he was rarely alone. Sometimes Ethan sat beside him, sometimes a group of kids gathered around, asking questions. Sometimes people simply stopped to say hello, all because one child decided to notice someone everyone else had overlooked, because one small act of kindness, a simple cookie and a moment of conversation, opened a door that had been closed for years. Kindness doesn't always look like something big. Sometimes it's just sitting beside someone who feels alone. Sometimes it's sharing a cookie. Sometimes it's noticing a person the world has forgotten, but those small moments can change a life. If this story touched your heart, remember this: somewhere near you, someone might be sitting alone, waiting to be noticed, and your small act of kindness might be the very thing that changes their world. So go out today and share a little kindness, because even the smallest gesture can create a ripple that reaches farther than you could ever imagine.